for South Dakota and Nebraska to engage in together. We've been noticing declining waterfowl participation numbers over the last 10 years in a dramatic way, and we're looking at a way to have the broadest impact on those populations that we possibly could. And so Rocco and Mark have been having discussions about this for years, about some of the changes we might be able to make waterfowl less of a daunting activity to get involved in for participants. And so I don't want to delay too much. I want to have Rocco and Mark really have an opportunity to present their experimental design and the process that we're going through to see if we can pursue a two-tiered licensing system in South Dakota and Nebraska. So without further delay, I'll have you two gentlemen kind of kick it off. Rocco, I don't know if you would like to get started.
I think Mark was going to head off here.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you. And thanks for everybody for calling in or tuning in today. Yeah, as you mentioned, Taniya, we've actually been talking about this for a number of years, actually. I think even back as far as 2011, I think is when some of our first discussions came about regarding two-tier and differential regulations for duck hunters. And some of that actually stemmed out of some basic, just some waterfowl hunting I was doing at the time. And there was my brother and I had discovered this pond here in southeast Nebraska that had a bunch of ducks on it, and so we'd go duck hunting, and there were a couple days in there where I was not able to go, and we're having pretty good success on it, and a couple days where we weren't going, or I couldn't go, but my brother had the opportunity and then didn't go. And I always thought that was odd because my brother, he likes to shoot and go out hunting, and I thought, well, that's kind of odd. And it kind of dawned on me at one point then that the main reason he wasn't really going or participating was the fact that, this was his first time out duck hunting, that he didn't know what the duck species were that were flying around. I mean, I think he knew some of them, but not all of them. And obviously there were some restrictions in place back in the day. And so that's really kind of the whole genesis of this thing in one way, was just the recognition that there's a barrier here potentially for people to participate in waterfowl hunting, and for my brother, at least he had the access to somebody that did know, or at least has the ability to identify ducks, if not in flight in hand. So when we got talking about this in the Flyway, and you start talking about differential regulations and making things simple, you can do that. We have the ability, if you will, to make regulations pretty simple if we wanted to. So we could restrict the season to protect some of those species that can't take a long seasonal harvest, make a pretty simple bag limit. But that obviously comes with a lot of cost in terms of hunting opportunity. And especially in the last 20 years, if you look at where duck populations are, if we took it upon ourselves to, again, reduce the season length and reduce the bag limit just to make things simple, Rocco and I would probably be tarred and feathered if our houses weren't burnt down at the same time, in reducing that opportunity by avid duck hunters that want all the season length they can get and all the ducks they want to harvest. And so that's always been the kind of the dichotomy in waterfowl hunting regulations is, if you want to provide as much hunting opportunity as possible, or we've kind of been on that premise, but when you do that, then again, you start getting into these differential regulations with different species and sex specific regulations, which again make it really complicated and makes it difficult for somebody that has little or no experience in waterfowl hunting to go out and participate in waterfowl hunting. And when you stop and think about some of the other barriers, just in terms of skills or accessing some of that, there's definitely other barriers or constraints out there for hunters. And some of those, again, also need to be addressed at some point in time, hopefully. But when it comes to this in particular, when you're talking about species or sex-specific duck bag limits, in terms of skills, for example, you can be a bad duck caller or don't know how to place your decoys or don't know how to hide or don't know where to set up at, or maybe even where to go, but that doesn't have any legal ramifications. When you put out a species restriction, say you pintails, for example, if you can only harvest one.
Time, because he's doing that on purpose.
If you put a harvest restriction on pintails at 1, you immediately then make every individual out there have to identify not only hen pintails, but every other duck species, so they know it's not a hen pintail. And so you immediately run into that when you hit a bag restriction. And so that's kind of where we went with it initially, was talking about, okay, let's have some bag limits. Why can't we have some bag limits for people that are new or have little experience in duck identification, be able to go out and participate, and then still retain all that hunting opportunity for people that have kind of negotiated the duck identification and all the other regulations out there, and you're kind of getting to both objectives in terms of duck regulations, where you're able to make it simple, but you're still providing opportunity. And so we embarked on this in 2018 again, and where we're at is, again, we still got some administrative steps to take, but essentially what we're looking at again is 2 sets of duck bag limits. So tier 1, for example, would be the kind of current bag limit in the Central Flyway of 6 ducks per day, with all the species and sex-specific regulations. So 5 mallards, only 2 of which can be hen mallards, 1 pintail, 2 canvasbacks, 2 redheads, 3 wood ducks, all that. You get all that. The second tier would be just a 3 duck bag limit, but there aren't any sex or species-specific regulations. So you could harvest any 3 ducks that came in, but again, obviously there's a reduced bag limit. The way we've set it up tentatively here, and the way it is looking like where it's going, is that everything else will remain the same in terms of season dates, zones, splits. Everything will be the same else in terms of licensing, permit costs, stamp costs, all that. The only difference will be in the regulations that a hunter can choose from. So both states and all states obviously have to have HIP certification to legally harvest waterfowl. So in both in South and North Dakota, during that HIP process will be when a hunter, when he comes onto the HIP website to register, he'll have to make that choice between whether he wants that full bag limit of 6 or he wants the reduced bag limit of 3. So that's kind of the choice that they're making at that point in time. And that obviously fits right into some of the things that we're doing and are able to do with some sampling for harvest, duck harvest information, and also will allow us to monitor what we have in terms of individuals selecting each tier, and as well as being able to track those individuals over time. We, again, as I kind of alluded to, we are also set up to look at duck harvest in this. That's another part of the equation, is that, and to alleviate any concern about harvesting a particular species that doesn't need additional harvest, and sometimes some of the comments we've gotten is, wow, now I can shoot 3 pintails and I can shoot 3 hen mallards and all that. They're worried about population reductions. Again, I think we can monitor the harvest of the different duck species using that HIP sampling frame, and South Dakota and Nebraska here, we're both ready to be able to do that in very similar ways to what the regular harvest is being estimated now with the Fish and Wildlife Service. And again, we'll be able to track hunters through and right now it's standing at 4-year experiment, through the 4 years, and be able to track them to see if they retain in either tier, change between tiers, and kind of those transition rates between those, as well as increases, decreases in what we're seeing for registrations. And so I think we'll be able to evaluate just what impact this differential bag limit will have on participation. And kind of the final thing is we're just also going to be able to track just how much time and effort we're putting into this, because it is, additional monitoring that's going to be required. And with that, I'll kind of stop there. I'm trying to think, have I missed anything, Rocco, or anything you need to add?
Well, I was just gonna add that one of the criticisms when we first started this back in 2011 and 12 was just kind of the lack of human dimensions data. And between then and now, there's been several projects that have been done either cooperatively by the Flyways through the NFC, and also a couple of different graduate students, which have indicated that duck ID is a barrier, and even some work that we've done internally, even 30% of our own prospective duck hunters, which were folks that had a small game license but hadn't duck hunted, indicated that duck ID in flight is difficult and precluding them from participating. And just, Mark and I have talked about this a lot, that, while it's a lot of work on the back end, it's a relatively cheap way to potentially touch a lot of prospective duck hunters. And there's really nothing else that we have from an R3 perspective in our states that could even come close to potentially, helping out that many folks. I mean, normally R3, at least in our states, are more geared as individual, one-on-one or small groups or things like that. This is kind of a broad-scale simplification to hopefully attract some participation and get rid of some of the risk. One thing that my former director always used to talk about is comparing duck hunting to other pastimes like golf or bowling. Or he'd always say, well, who in their right mind would go bowling or golfing if you had to be so proficient at it immediately that they were going to be fined legally if they weren't. And that's a good way to think about it. This is a way to bring down some barriers and hopefully bend that curve up as far as duck hunting numbers go.
So I just wanted to step in real quick, and I think Mark and Rocco really nailed it with their kind of outline of the program. And so where we are right now is we're each presenting this information to our commissions. We've gone through the central Flyway to kind of get their stamp of approval on this. And now we're looking at how we as states could potentially adopt this and move forward. So right now what we're looking at is both of our states having a combined committee to bounce marketing efforts off of each other and hopefully roll out similar marketing strategies between now and when the sale of this new two-tiered system could potentially go live. And so, like I said, this is a regional opportunity for all of us, and that's really exciting. Oftentimes states are working in silos on some of these issues, but wildlife doesn't stay within state limits. This is an opportunity to raise a tide across a flyway, and so we've been really excited about that opportunity, and we've been setting some action steps for what that looks like moving ahead. Rocco or Mark, do you want to talk a little bit more about the timeline and kind of what we're looking at moving ahead?
Sure. So, like Taniya said, we're basically all this is couched in that our commissions need to act on this. So, on the federal end, we have the go-ahead from the Fish and Wildlife Service through the SRC, but we need to go through our internal process yet and have a stamp of approval, hopefully, from our commissions. And the implementation year is actually a 2021-22 duck season, so it's a year out. So we have some time to get this message out, to get the nuts and bolts figured out, and to figure out all the logistics, because there's going to be a lot of logistics behind this, whether it's parts collection, whether it's mailing. We're planning on, for instance, mailing ID books, I think, to our two-tier, our second-tier folks. So there's a lot of things on the back end to figure out between now and a year from this September. I know, Mark, did you want to add anything?
No, Rocco. Again, I think we're a year and a half out from implementation, and probably the only other thing we need to add, just for clarification purposes, this is just for the regular duck season. I know South Dakota doesn't have a teal season per se, but we do, and this two-tier system does not apply to September teal seasons. It's just for the regular duck season. And yeah, I think there's just some logistical things that we're going to work on, kind of piloting it this fall, just in terms, again, trying to get stuff out that we need to get out, and we should be ready to go in 2021.
That's perfect.
So, yeah.
Thank you both for kind of outlining that timeline. I can't express how excited we are about the potential to increase participation of novice waterfowl hunters in this. By removing some of those initial barriers with this second tier option of a simplified bag, I mean, that's an opportunity that we have to really encourage new people to get into a support, an activity that's been remarkably challenging in the past. So from an R3 perspective, I think we're all really excited to see how this experimental design rolls out and what our final reports look like a few years down the road. Another thing I know we wanted to address on this call is some of the language that's been used around this change and what you might hear moving forward. There's been some discussion about this being called a two-tiered system. There's been some discussion about this being called three splash. So I just wanted to kind of clarify how those two phrases fit together with one another. And you may hear it called both. You'll see some of it in South Dakota language back and forth, and you'll probably see more of the two-tiered language. But overall, the migratory bird certificate, you'll have two options. It's a two-tiered certificate option for hunting duck specifically. And one of those tiers is a traditional option with your regular bag limits, and then the second tier is what is the quote-unquote three splash option. That's where whatever the first 3 ducks you harvest are the ones that fill your bag that day, regardless of age or gender or species restrictions. So I just wanted to clarify the language piece of this. If you'd heard it, wanted to kind of eliminate some of that confusion. Anything, Mark or Rocco, you want to add about that?
I don't think so. I mean, it's just going to be, there may be some slight marketing changes or differences between the two states, but the ultimate experiment, if you in any of the final reports or things, will be called the two-tier experiment.
Okay. So do you guys have anything to kind of finally wrap up the presentation portion, or are you ready to open it up for questions?
I guess I'm ready for questions. I don't know about you, Mark.
Yeah, ready for questions.
Great, thanks guys. That was an awesome overview. And I know I personally had read about this in the Midwest R3 newsletter, but other than that, I hadn't heard much about it. So I was really excited to have you all on and talking about this and getting some clarification. And we had one question while you were talking from Justin Greider. He says, is the idea for new users to graduate to a Tier 1 license? And I think that's a really good question that kind of puts things in perspective and is a great way to kind of summarize.
Yeah, so this is Rocco. There certainly has been a lot of discussion about that in the run-up to this, and there's no requirement to graduate up to the full framework, but I think that is definitely a goal is to have folks that choose to want to learn their ducks to then, once they become comfortable, they would be able to then choose in the next season or 2 seasons from now the more, the traditional framework where you have, or the traditional packages where you have all the sex and species ID. But I think there's also going to be a cohort of people that just choose that simplified bag, and they'd be happy forever with that, and we're fine with that as well. But duck ID is important, and that's one of the reasons why I mentioned earlier we're thinking about, for all the folks that are interested in the simplified version, we would maybe mail them a Central Flyway duck ID book just so that to help them out in their pursuit of knowledge for duck ID. But yeah, there's no inherent restrict or expectation of graduation or moving up in the tier, but you can certainly do that in subsequent years.
And if I could add on to that specific piece, in our human dimensions work, there was a significant number of avid hunters who identified that they struggled with identification of ducks in flight and in hand. And so as a result of that survey, we may see quite a bit of reactivation as a result of offering that second tier, not just new recruitment. So when we look at all 3 R's across the board, I think that this piece of licensing change has a broad impact, again, not just on recruitment.
Yeah, and this has been known to be a huge barrier for entry to duck hunters. I mean, I personally have only hunted ducks a couple times because I am not all of that good with duck ID in the field. You know, once I get them in my hand, I know what they are, but flying, it's really hard, and it takes a lot of time to learn. And I know that the Illinois Learn to Hunt program actually put out an online duck ID course with a quiz, so you can test yourself there, and that really helped kind of developing that and then going through it. So there are things like that, but I think that, you know, changing the regulations at their base, I mean, that's a huge step forward for R3, getting something like this passed. So great job on the work you've done so far, and I can't wait to see how it goes.
Thanks, Kristen.
Yeah, absolutely. Samantha Petter has a question. How long will this be in place? And thinking about evaluations, do you think this approach might take a few years to see results? It seems like the newer regulation might take some time to learn, and could we see gradual pursuit of it once a few people experience it?
Yeah, good question. And right now, as it stands, we've kind of looked at a 4-year time frame, just kind of initially. And I think Samantha did hit on something there, that it may take a few years for people to grow accustomed to it, or the reverse, that you know, they go out and try it and they still don't want to go duck hunting. Or, you know,
Sure.
There's got to be there is a certain element, I think, beyond just 4 years. But I think just in this initial run up, us in the Fish and Wildlife Service kind of just said, let's look at this for 4 years, and then I think we'll take a step back, you know, in a couple of years and evaluate, okay, do we need to kind of increase the number of years of the experiment? And I think too, the other thing, kind of in between that if this is a success, what other states may want to jump into this experiment. And they're not going to be able to maybe just jump in, just, okay, include us in all this stuff. I think there's going to have to be kind of a different evaluation. It'll be similar evaluation procedures, but maybe a different scale of what we're doing evaluation-wise. And so I think that's going to require, you know, another additional experimental period. So this could be in place for a number of years, longer than just the kind of the initial 4.
Sure, yeah. And do you have a pulse on what other states in the Central Flyway are saying, or how other flyways are looking at this?
So,
you want to take this one, Rocco, or me?
I'll try. I'll take a stab at it. So I think, frankly, with a lot of states in and without, inside and outside the Central Flyway, they're looking to see how well this goes and how much work it is. And I do think there's a lot of interest, but they want to see how it works first. And you know, there's going to be potential, definitely potential for expansion. I know the Atlantic Flyway has expressed quite a bit of interest. I don't know so much about the Mississippi Flyway, but you know, they're the Mississippi Flyway. So, but in the Pacific Flyway already has extremely liberal regs, so they may not, you know. We'll see how much interest there is there, and I'm not sure if they have some of the same declines of hunter numbers just because they have a bigger population base. But yeah, the short answer is there's a lot of interest. They're just waiting to see how. They're seeing if we're going to fall on our face, I think, first.
Yeah, we're the first 2 lemmings. We're the first 2 lemmings. Yeah.
That's fair. You know, if somebody's going to do it, let them do it. See what happens. I get it. That's awesome. So have you talked to any of the waterfowl guides in either of your states to see what they're saying about it?
Not at this juncture. I think at this, we're still a little, just in terms of starting to get the word out about when and where and what and how this is all going to come about. We're still kind of at the initial jump-off stage on that. And I think there's a lot of other people that need to be informed. But I think that's, they'll get the information at probably at the same time as the general public. And we're and that's part of one of the reasons that we've been coordinating with South Dakota and making sure that we kind of, jump off together, so to speak, and
Right.
and somebody's not getting too far ahead of each other, because this stuff can, this is, not top secret information by any stretch of the imagination, but you kind of want to make sure that we have the proper information going out and to the right audiences at the right time.
Yeah. But to speak to that, there is going to be a concerted effort to bring partners in. Once this does go live, we're going to be bringing in NGOs and hunter groups and things like that to try to create buy-in and also help promote it.
Awesome. Yeah, and a relevant question, kind of in that same vein, from Kyler Whitaker. He says, do the changes have to go all the way up through legislation or to the commission level approval, or is this something that you can do within the agency?
So I think in both of our states we have to go to a commission level approval to change administrative rule, but the first hurdle was to get approval from the Fish and Wildlife Service. So.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, we had to, this is, again, you're talking regulations, duck harvest regulations, and so, yeah, we had to, we've sat down and talked with the service and had good discussions about, how to design this experiment and what we needed to do and the requirements and all that. So, I think we've had really good discussions and cooperation from the service on this at this point, and so, yeah, it's just kind of that last administrative step within our agencies to make sure, we're ready to go.
And one thing, to take a step back, we kind of forgot to mention too that actually all 4 flyways were involved in the development of this experimental design. So they actually were allowed to, we had a small working group that worked on this together. So we had participation from all 4 flyways.
Okay, awesome. So they've been there through the development portion at least. Okay, great. And if you guys can see the chat box, Samantha is sharing some links there as we go along. So if we're talking about something that you want more clarification on, just check that box because she may have shared a link to it. And our next question comes from Scott Taylor. He says, do you foresee allowing hunters to change their initial tier choice, provided the hunting season hasn't started yet, for at least the first year or two while people are getting used to it? And I think I read that the answer is no, but maybe you can elaborate.
So at least in South Dakota, since our licenses go on sale for the license year starting December 15th, so there's going to be a few months where there's going to be people potentially buying some licenses that just don't know anything about it yet. So I think there's going to be an opportunity before the first season starts that folks will. We just had this discussion last week where we may be able to switch people that first year before the season starts, just to help them out if there is somebody that just didn't know about it the first year. I don't know if Nebraska's had any of those conversations, but we're trying to resolve that.
Yeah, and we have not at this point, but that is something that at least Rocco and I have talked about, and I think something you need to anticipate, that somebody's going to click the wrong box at the beginning and not and be in something they don't want to be in, and so I think before season begins, yeah, we might be able to, I think we should be allowed to change them over, and I think we have that capability. It probably gets a little bit more dicey once season begins and they begin to understand, okay, or maybe fully understand what they've gotten themselves into, or when they get out in the field and maybe they haven't realized they checked the wrong box and they get stopped by a conservation officer and something to that effect. It's always hard to plan for the contingencies, but again, I think we have the capability of being able to change those individuals at a certain point, but if they're calling up they're a tier 2 guy and it's the middle of the season. They go, well, I really wanted to be in tier 1. It's be like, I don't think we're going to do that. But
Right.
so.
Great. And just a point of clarification, these tiers will be in effect for out-of-state hunters also, correct?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, so I think that will be interesting to see also how the non-resident hunters take to the tier system, and if they maybe bring it back to their state agencies and say, hey, this is really cool, maybe we should look into doing this. Or maybe they hate it. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
That's the great thing about data, right?
Yeah, and I mean, one of the the other thing we probably forgot to mention is that one of the choices too is for youth, and obviously that's probably one of the bigger aspects of this in terms of hunters taking their youth out. And again, what we've kind of the South Dakota example, I think as Rocco's boss had his son out last fall, and the first bird in was a hen pintail, and he shoots a hen pintail. So Rocco's supervisor for the rest of the morning was on pins and needles, trying to make sure he didn't get another hen pintail or something. So here you are out there in a youth waterfowl hunting situation, which you're trying to be, the last thing you really want to worry about is some sort of legality thing, and and so I think that's the other thing too. And from the non-resident perspective, if they come here, they could register their youth for the 2-tier, the second tier, and let them go hunting. And that to me is, I'd be really hopeful to see some of that. I don't know how much of that really occurs in our state, but maybe this is an avenue for people from out of state to come in and try it with their youth and see how they like it.
The other angle that we're really hopeful takes off is the mentoring aspect. If an experienced waterfowl hunter, I could just take myself for an example. If I was going to take a novice out, I would be extremely paranoid that they're going to violate without intention when they're out with me. Mm-hmm. But if I don't have that, if I don't have that worry, I'd be much more likely to take a novice waterfowl hunting. So we're hoping that really helps out with the mentoring aspects as well.
Yeah, and Rocco, just on that anecdotally again, and you hate to put too much, here's my story, but last fall I took a brand new individual out. She'd never been duck hunting before. She managed to shoot 2 Drake-hooded mergansers, and from then on I'm like, oh my God, here we go. Now I got to pay attention really big time. And there again, just in terms of that, not a youth, but just a first-time duck hunter, it would have been just nice, to have her been in that situation where it's she could shoot a third duck no matter what it was. And because immediately as a duck hunter, your first thing is like, oh my God, you can't shoot any more of those. So right there you kind of introduce this tension that there's, you could do something wrong. And that just, not that it ruins the hunt, but it kind of disrupts the flow a little bit. So
yeah.
So to add on to that point, I think we have the opportunity here to monitor the wild waterfowl populations as well.
Yep.
And so, Rocco, do you want to touch on the elasticity of those populations in response to something like this if we do start taking 3 of any species?
Oh yeah. So especially in Nebraska and South Dakota, we've done some work. So we can go through the kind of the parts collection that's currently being done and kind of do a worst case scenario based on these new recruits are going to go out and they're going to hammer canvasbacks, so they're going to hammer pintails, or some of these species that are at risk, and we can basically determine if that's likely to occur, and it's not. Just the fact that for a South Dakota hunter, Nebraska hunter to actually, in years when there's, let's say, a 2 pintail bag, to achieve the second pintail is so remote anyway that the odds then would go down on a third, but we do the worst case scenario and assume that the odds are the same as the second. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I can't remember what the analysis showed, Mark, but it was like a couple hundred pintails per, what was it, per 500
per 1,000
or 1,000 new recruits. So it's a very low risk, and that's one of the reasons why the service approved it, was because we demonstrated that the risk to the populations were very low.
Okay, great. And do you have a plan for repopulation if you find that if for some reason, you know, the populations are diving more than you assumed they would?
So the experiment, I think, ceases if we get if we go to a restrictive package. Correct, Mark?
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So
if duck populations tank, they're in the next 4 years, just independently, the experiment has to press pause until that comes back. But I certainly don't foresee that happening over in the next 4 years, but especially with the habitat conditions we have right now. But yeah, it's built right in. You know, if we're in a liberal or moderate package, then it's a go. If not, then we're paused.
And I think we'll have to take a look too if for example, even if other duck populations are doing well, and canvasbacks, for example, start to decline in significant numbers or something, then I think we'll have to take a look at that. And that's kind of one of those independent case things that we'll have to just talk about it when it occurs. It's kind of hard to, we know that they're probably having something to do with the experiment and what we can do with that, but it's kind of hard to play out that scenario with the regulations until that point. And again, probably the other thing too is that one of the reasons South Dakota and Nebraska were able to do this is, as kind of Rocco mentioned, was, you know, our two states do not harvest some of these species that you may have a lot of concern about in significant numbers where you'd have an impact on the population at all. So again, as Rocco talked about, we just don't shoot canvasbacks and pintails in sufficient numbers here in either South Dakota or Nebraska to put any dent in the population.
Great. And this one's for Taniya. So while you're working on this R3 effort, what goes into that? How did this come about? How did you play into that? And do you have any advice for other R3 coordinators that might want to take something like this on?
Great question. I was really lucky to have Rocco and Mark and Michaela, who actually works in Nebraska as well, as folks who are super engaged in R3 efforts. We've got a really passionate group of people already on the ground, and so kind of being involved in the R3 movement from this perspective, just mostly focused on getting the right brains in the room at the right time and hammering out realistic timelines and establishing deliverable action items. So it hasn't been hard because we already have these passionate people who already have the plan in place to carry it forward. From my perspective, it was mostly just getting all of those brains and that momentum in the same place together so that it could continue to build momentum. But yeah, I really was not instrumental in the creation of this plan. I've just kind of tagged along and started bringing in the communication side of things so that we could start developing outreach materials in conjunction with the plan. Now, once the experimental design is in place and we start seeing results, that's when we're going to be able to report out to other states on you know, what works and what doesn't work about implementing this. And to me, if I were to provide advice for any other R3 coordinators, that's where it would be. Look where our failures are. Look where our successes are. Take our experimental design, get the right brains in the room together, and go with it. Speaking of which, thank you. Speaking of which, Rocco, I believe our experimental design, Mark, I think our experimental design is public, correct?
Yes.
Yep.
So, Kristen, if there's anybody who is interested in taking a look at the actual design of the project and would like to see what that looks like, you know, for reference for their own state, we'd be happy to share that with them.
Great. And is that a link online or is it a document?
It's a document right now.
Public.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's not public yet.
Okay.
I mean, it's not. It's a public document, but it's not linked anywhere yet because it's not been approved by our commission yet.
Sure. Okay. That makes sense. Samantha is texting me a question. She said, could you elaborate on experimental design? And is that like a strategic plan that goes through the design, or what does the document look like?
Hey, Rocco, are you next to your computer right now?
Yeah.
I'm looking at it right now.
Yep.
It's an
Are you on the
evaluation.
Adobe,
It's an
are you on
evaluation
Adobe
plan.
Connect?
Oh, I am not.
Okay. Okay. I
Um,
was just seeing if any of us could just share the document visually with people.
yeah, dang.
I think I sent it to you, Taniya.
Okay, let me see if I can pull it up. But go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, it's an evaluation plan, and when we're talking to design, I think it comes back to being able to set this up in a way that we can track what the objectives being, that we're able to track hunter participation, duck harvest, and then finally just kind of the resource investment in this. And so the evaluation or study design is kind of based on, us being able to accomplish or meet those objectives of tracking participation, duck harvest. So it's nothing, full of statistics or anything like that, and it's only an 11-page document, but it does cover kind of the bigger aspects of the constraints and things that, and again, coming back to like, if the season's in a restrictive state, then, or determined by adaptive harvest management, it shuts down. It doesn't appeal to, teal season, stuff like that. So,
Okay.
and again, we're glad to share it.
That's awesome. Maybe we can get it posted on the community, perchance.
Kristen, what I can do is I can send you a copy of it if that'd be the simplest thing to do,
Okay.
and then I'll let you. Again, and I'll probably wait on that until, again, as Rocco mentioned, just so we can kind of get the final stamp by our commissions or by our agencies. I'll send that to you, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. No rush. We definitely want to do it the right way. So unless anybody else has questions, or if you guys have anything else you want to add, I think we are about done here. So we'll give maybe a few seconds for people to type in the box if they have anything else. But for now, thanks for being here. To our presenters, we really appreciate you. And this was a great rundown of a clearly complicated and time-consuming system that you took to try and relieve some of these R3 barriers. So this is great. I'm super excited to see where this goes. Looking forward to getting some of those evaluations back and seeing, if this works, how can we expand it? That's always something we're looking for in programs of scalability, and I think this definitely has that potential. So great job with the project. Thank you so much for being here to present to us today, and we will wrap up.
Awesome. Kristen, thank you so much for having us today. It's been great being able to kind of share information with the community. And if folks have any questions moving forward, please feel free to reach out to us. We all are excited to talk about this, and we'd be happy to answer questions.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I was just going to say that. Any wanting to visit on this or chat or look at progress as this moves forward, feel free to give me a call.
Same here.
Great. And do you guys mind if I maybe put up your email addresses when I post this recording so that people can follow up with you if they want to?
Sure.
Sure.
Yep.